All right, it's preparing to stream live. Let me get off the camera.
Okay. I think we're live.
It says it's live, but I'm not seeing it. Are you seeing it?
Not yet.
Hmm. It says we're live. All right, what's going on here? Oh, we are live. I'm sorry, we are live. Go ahead.
All right.
All right. Good evening. Kev, you kicking us off?
Yeah, and then you'll jump in with the thank yous. I just wanted to relieve you of those duties, just even seeing how you are sticking with the tradition of one of the co-founders ending our season with telling stories. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June edition of Storytellers New Haven. We are glad that you're here with us tonight and continue to support us in this endeavor. And I'm really excited about tonight because in light of what's going on between the continued COVID-19, everything that's associated with that, as well as all of the peaceful protests and people, the outrage of all that's happening with police brutality and the killing of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and the countless others. I think tonight's going to be about some healing, but it's going to also be about some truth. And I'm excited because tonight we have Tellen is our co-founder, Karen DuBois Walton, as well as Byron Hurt, who is a great documentarian as well as a great storyteller himself. And so we are in for a treat. Before I turn it over to Karen, I just want to say tonight wraps up our third season. And Storytellers was born out of Karen and I's experience in the community leadership program, and which sparked our interest in continuing that endeavor of having people tell story. Our motto is that we want to build community one story at a time. We believe that New Haven has over 130 stories that need to be told, and that is our endeavor to do so. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen before we jump right in.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. It's hard to believe that this is our third season wrapping up. And so I am honored to be a teller for this evening. As always, I want to thank Rev Kev, Kevin Ewing of Baobab Tree Studios for their support and always being our tech on this. And as we transition into the virtual world because of COVID, keeping us going. So thank you to Rev Kev for that. I don't think we have any other housekeeping to do, right?
No, well, I guess we'll talk about, well, give our thanks to Graustein as well as Concat at the end. So I think I'll turn it back over because it would be a little awkward for you to introduce yourself. So tonight we're going to get started and we're going to go ahead and introduce a woman who needs no introduction, but we will give her due respect anyway. My wife and a co-founder of Storytellers New Haven, Dr. Karen DuBois Walton, is no stranger to storytellers. She's told before, but she's also been very active in the New Haven community. And so I believe we're in for a treat. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Karen.
Thank you. Okay. My heart has broken over the recent public acts of racism in Minneapolis, in Kentucky, in Georgia, what we saw in Central Park, and elsewhere, things that have really ignited this country, and is forcing a level of reconciliation around race and racism and racial equity in this country. And so it's really in that light, in that spirit, that I offer this story this evening. So on last Sunday, I found myself sitting in the middle of I-95 on the highway with Kevin and with our two sons, Kevin and Caleb, with thousands of friends and acquaintances and strangers. And we were sitting there bound together for George Floyd, for Breonna Taylor, for Ahmaud Arbery, for Christian Cooper, and for too many others, names that are known and unknown. And as I reflected on the protest and our occupation of I-95, I made mention that there was something special about this moment, seeing my now young adult sons take the action of their own accord and in their own ways. They've been raised by Kevin and I and to be active community members. They've been to many a protest or a organizing effort or a planning meeting because mom or dad brought them. And then as they went on to their own respective colleges, they took on their own activism in their own way, separate from us. But this stood out for me as a moment where I was there to witness them walking into their own power and wrestling with issues in their own ways and taking actions that aligned for them. And I remember feeling great pride in that moment. And it made me start to think about the development of my own voice, the times and the events and the people that have shaped who I've become and how I think and feel about things. And many of those experiences are born out of the challenges faced by my two civil rights era educated African-American parents who are raising their middle-class family, seeking to provide for their daughters the best opportunities. And as a result, that meant that I was raised in different parts of New York State, born in New York City, moving immediately to the suburbs of Albany, then living in Albany, moving to a rural area in Western New York, a working class community, and then to a very well-resourced suburb of Buffalo. And they were places that were each very different, but the commonality amongst all of them was that my family was often the only along many different dimensions. And being the only meant alternating between standing alone in unpopular positions or staying silent sometimes and bearing the discomfort of swallowing my voice. I can remember simple examples like third grade in my all girls private school in Albany, and in a math lesson where we were using math manipulatives, and the teacher led the class through the exercise. And we got to a point where the majority of my classmates selected one answer and only a few of us chose another one. The teacher kept pushing to see who felt conviction about their response. And slowly, more and more of my classmates who selected the answer that I had started to move over to the more popular response. And I remember what it felt like to doubt myself because I was choosing something different than everybody else thought. And it was just a couple of us that held firm to what ultimately was revealed to be the right answer. And I remember that this was actually noted on my report card in the comments that year. I remember how my mom beamed with pride because she said I was an independent thinker. And somewhere that third grade example stayed with me. I can remember being in sixth grade when I was the only African-American in my class in a public school, now in rural Western New York. And I understood our family was one of very few African-American families, but I also came to understand that we were the minority in being a Democratic-leaning family. Here I can remember the teacher polling the class around who we thought was going to win the presidential election. Now, to be fair, 11 and 12-year-olds' political leanings most accurately reflect probably that of the adults in their lives, and mine was no different. And so I knew what I had heard in my household, and that determined how I felt about it. And I found myself one of very few hands raised in support of candidate Jimmy Carter. The vast majority of my classmates were going for candidate Bob Dole. And after some level of debate around the election, I can remember my teacher summing it up by saying that it seemed that the class preferred pineapples over peanuts, making a reference to Dole and pineapples and, of course, Jimmy Carter's peanut farm. So that position, I can remember feeling a little bit lonely in my position there. But I have to admit that I did feel and probably gloated a little bit when I returned to class after the election and was happy to proclaim that Jimmy Carter was in fact president of the United States. Peanuts it would be, I guess. I can remember around high school taking part in my first type of protest. We had moved to Western New York because my father, who was a hospital administrator, was the executive director of a large state psychiatric center, psych hospital in Western New York. And the hospital was transitioning at that time from a period where people were institutionalized for long periods of time to starting to deinstitutionalize patients with mental illness and moving them into community-based settings. And New York State, in great government fashion of that time, saw that rather than taking the funds from long-term hospital stays and using it for sort of community-based treatment, they saw the opportunity to create a prison. And so the hospital that provided the livelihood for both my parents began its transition, or was slated to transition to become a prison. And so I took up that cause. That was one of the first things I can remember being a protester around. I had a T-shirt that proudly said, "Save the hospital." And I wore that T-shirt and even crafted my first letters of opposition to the governor, who was actually the father to the current New York governor, so writing letters to Mario Cuomo at the time. I can remember going to school. I remember people mocking my T-shirt. And in most ways, that was probably that they were mocking mental illness and anything associated with mental illness. And I can remember being embarrassed about that and also feeling convicted about it. But I also remember that on that one, many of my classmates were supportive of the movement. It impacted the employment of their family members, of their parents. And it also created fear in the community about what it meant to have a prison come into the community. So on the surface, my protest here aligned with a sort of local popular opinion or a majority opinion. And it was really only behind the walls of my own home that I heard the more nuanced discussions about the lack of appropriate funding for mental health treatment, discussions about punishment being prioritized over treatment, discussions about how this prison meant that Black and Brown and Native bodies would be behind the walls. And Native was significant in our town because this town abutted a Seneca Nation reservation. And so issues of the Seneca Nation and Native peoples and sovereignty issues were part of our discourse in our household at that time. So while we had opposition and sort of aligned with the town, I think there were a lot of ways in which our alignment was rooted in some different understandings of the issues. My protest, as insignificant as it may seem for a teenager to take a position on this, but also the more sizable protests of the members of the town ultimately were unsuccessful, and the hospital transitioned to become mostly a prison. But the lessons that I learned, that decisions are made by people who are accountable to others, that we have the power to make our voices known and heard to those people who make decisions, that we need to look at issues from many different sides, that there are ways in which folks can be on the same side of an issue, but for very different reasons. I learned lessons about what it meant to speak up within a system that was also a system that was feeding our family. I learned how my parents balanced that line and walked that line. All lessons that I think stayed with me. Some of you know that not too long after that, I lost my parents. They both died when I was 17. One died right before I left New York to come to Connecticut to go to college, to come to Yale. And my mom died in October of my freshman year at Yale. And as I think about the freshman year, one of the major things that really gave me life during what otherwise was an incredibly traumatic year was the activism that I encountered on Yale's campus. I came to Yale during the time of student-led activism around the Yale divestment movement, a movement to get Yale to pull its financial resources from companies that were doing business and supporting the economy of apartheid South Africa. And I found in the movement dynamic, powerful, inspirational students, students from many backgrounds. And I found them working side by side and in hand with New Haveners who were committed to seeking change. And I joined in, and I imagined that that movement might be something like the movement that my parents had described to me about the civil rights era. And I felt connected to them in that, and I connected to something bigger than me. And for moments, I was able to forget my own pain while I joined with other people who were trying to heal pain in a country halfway across the globe. So during my time at Yale, there were notable things like students taking over the Woodbridge Hall where the Yale president's office is, and marching and protesting, the building of a shanty town on Beinecke Plaza. And while the Yale Divestment Coalition was not able to convince the corporation to divest Yale's millions from companies that did business in South Africa, the movement sparked an important debate, I think, about the university's ethical responsibilities, and, in some way partnered with the much more significant actions on the ground in South Africa and worldwide that ultimately tackled a system that is as racist as the United States system of its forms of apartheid and discrimination. So part of what made New Haven home for me is the spirit of activism that lives here. I've seen many things: Yale union agreement, protests for fair agreements, unionization drives at the hospital, or any number of things where the communities come together to collectively raise voices about inequities. And one of the things I love about New Haven is that it's a community that fights for each other. And so as I think about the first time that I can remember marching with my sons, and I think they'll correct me if I'm wrong about it, but I think that the first thing that we came together as a family in New Haven, hitting the streets, had to do with right following the tragic murder of Trayvon Martin. And that was a case that really captured my sons' attention and really touched them and really hit home for them. And that was 2012. And so 8 years later, here we were marching as a family over more lost lives. I think I continue to feel called to actions that are combating ongoing racism in our society. My work and what I choose to do pushes for an agenda that's trying to create more opportunity for everybody around housing primarily, education, healthcare. I also stand in solidarity alongside those who are doing work around under a whole number of other immigration reform, bail reform, criminal justice reform, pushing an agenda that's trying to address the inequities in resource distribution, all kinds of things. And so it's for all of those reasons that I think we took to the streets these past few weeks and joined the thousands of others that have been in the streets and gone on the airwaves and everywhere else trying to sound an alarm about the system, and also trying to dream about a world that could look different. And so sitting with my sons and my husband on I-95 highway, something I never thought I'd be doing on last Sunday, feeling such pride about how they're walking into their own activism. I again felt very connected to the legacy of my parents and their parents and all those that came before. A legacy that makes it okay to stand alone, but really relishes the community of collective action. A legacy that can withstand taking unpopular positions, but takes great pleasure when those unpopular positions can win. A legacy that reflects that not every struggle, when in the struggle, will feel like victory, but that all those moments work together for the good. And finally, I end every work email that I send with the same quote, which is a part of a legacy, in the words of Martin Luther King, that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think we all play a part in bending it. So I thank you. Not sure if Kevin is there.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm trying to get back. Trying to get back.
All right.
Oh, something, I don't know. Start my video. Okay, yes.
Can
The
you see the
trials.
questions or?
No, I can't. I don't know why I can't see questions. Can you?
Now, we might need Rev Kev to actually come on video and help us with questions this time.
We don't have any at the moment.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, I do. I have, here we have, so here's a statement from Steve Ham. These protests have been inspiring. In New Haven, we are all in it together. Beyond protests, what do you think the next step should be? Also, I think you should, what do you think the next step should be?
Well, I'd love to know what you censored there, but I'm sure you'll tell me later. What do I think the next step should be? So I think we need to be committed to not letting this be just a moment, but that it's really moving forward in every aspect of our lives that we're examining. How are we creating greater racial equity? So simple things, I think we need to remain in connection and in community with each other, shameless plug for Storytellers, but the whole reason we started this was to create a space where people could come together and through story hear from each other, because that's the way that we see each other's humanity. We connect to things that we see in common. We pause and notice things that we have different, but we ultimately see each other as people. And I think that is the spirit of racial equity work. So I hope that we'll stay in community. I hope that we'll stay open to conversation, open to listening and feedback. I hope we'll each own that we all walk this world carrying bias and prejudice, and that we, in acknowledging that the way we get free of it and not get blinded or hampered by it or limited by it is by acknowledging it, so that we can notice it when it pops up, and we can then have a wider range of responses to things. So I hope we'll all do that. I hope we'll find, racism pops up in every aspect of society. So whatever it is, wherever we enter, I hope we'll enter it, whether it's, staying engaged on the police brutality issues, whether it's in education, healthcare, housing is my lane. I hope that we will look in each of those settings for the ways in which we are including only some and excluding others in ways that happen just because that's the way we've set up society and haven't questioned it anymore. And that we'll begin to notice those things and question and wonder why there's not diversity in our friend circle, or why there's not diversity in our neighborhood, or why there's not diversity in the teachers that teach our kids, or any of those things. And then in noticing it, then that we then start to challenge, in asking the question, start to challenge the system that has set it up that way, and create space for some different ways of being.
Okay, so Erica Bradley, the lovely Erica Bradley says, what an incredible experience. Denise Page gives you a thumbs up. Your good friend Laura Hershevitz says, amen and thank you, Karen. And Liz Hammond says, thank you. But I do have two things, if I may.
Okay.
The first one was,
the toughest questions come from your husband, so.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm trying to take it easy. So did the students who favored Bob Dole on behalf of their parents, were they able to articulate why their parents were supporting Bob Dole?
Oh, geez, I can't actually remember the detail of the debate that happened among sort of 11 and 12-year-olds. And I don't know that I was able to articulate it, greatly beyond the fact that that's the way I knew my parents were going. And so that naturally was the way that that I was going. I cannot profess to say that at 11 I had some well articulated understanding of Jimmy Carter's platform at the time, but I'm happy that that's where I stood, because I think he has continued to lead in his post presidential life in a way that has really been a moral compass. So I'm glad I was there early, early adopter.
So
But I can't say that I can't say that I know why. I think I was, I think it was a very Republican leaning town, and I think we were one of fewer families that were registered Dems.
yeah, I'm pretty sure you probably did have a well articulated argument for Jimmy Carter. Erica Bradley asks, what resources would you recommend for young people to help them understand the current environment we find ourselves in?
For young people, I'm almost tempted to say that we need to like listen to young people and let them be the resource, because there's so many ways in which when I talk to young people, I just note how much farther ahead they seem at this age than I felt like I was at that age, around understandings of equity and around acceptance of humanity. And that, might be the skewed sample that I'm interacting with, right? But I look at the 4,000 plus people that gathered on Friday and marvel that that was a youth-led demonstration here in New Haven. And I think the youth are leading, and we need to follow that lead. But if I had to offer things, I would say, I'm a psychologist at heart, right? That's my training. So I'd want to make sure that we're taking care of kids fully as they move through this, that we're allowing them space to feel and experience everything and process everything that's happening, and that we help them with the feelings that come up, and the anxiety and worries and anger and fear and all of that. So I'd say to stay connected to that would be one thing. I'd say that kids, I think all of us, learn things that feel relatable to us and interesting to us. And this is a great opportunity to be talking about the great literature and history of movements up until this point, and the current day movements. And so I'd say, to help young people process that information that they're seeing. And it's a great opportunity to be able to begin to help them sort through sources of information, and what they want to put value in, and what, at the risk of quoting somebody that I would never quote, right? But being able to figure out the real news from the fake news and that kind of thing, I think is a place also.
All right, great. So before we move on to our next teller, I just want to say that actually our first protest that Kevin was involved with was in April of 1997, following the execution of Malik Jones by East Haven
You are
police
absolutely right.
officer. And we marched, and we marched into East Haven, where we were met with such vile and disgusting behavior. But that was the first protest that Kevin was involved with us.
Thank you for reminding me of that, right? Absolutely. That was his first.
Yep. So anyway, all right. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. There were some more comments. Thank you for your activism and modeling every day. And the protests have been inspiring. So, people are logging on, and people are really loving your story. So again, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
All right. Well, great. So now we'll move on to our next teller. So I have to tell you really quickly. I know Byron. He's my fraternity brother, but he's also made some really powerful documentaries. But I became really I really began to admire him as I read his Facebook posts. His Facebook posts are always provocative, always thought provoking. I think we share similar thoughts in being anti-racist and trying to hold space for just equity and justice, things of that nature. But his Facebook posts made me think that we had to have him. So when I went to tell Karen about it, her initial reaction was, "What's his connection to New Haven?" Because as we said, Storytellers was about living, working, and loving New Haven. But I said that I'm going to try some executive privilege as a co-founder and say he's connected to New Haven through me as my fraternity brother. So, so after some meaningful negotiation, Byron, I was able to get you to be here tonight. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brother Byron Hurt. And I'll let him tell his story and his introduction.
All right. Well, first of all, Brother Kevin, Rue to you.
Rue.
And thank you very much for skillfully and artfully negotiating on my behalf. And to Karen, thank you so much for your powerful story. Stories are very healing, and they encourage people to share a bit of themselves when they hear someone who opens up and shares a bit of themselves and makes themselves vulnerable. It always makes people feel a little bit more comfortable to share a piece of them in exchange. So thank you very much for you sharing your story. I try to think about, how I could be best useful to the audience here in talking about, sharing a story that, may be inspiring or may be meaningful. And because I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm not sure how many of your audience members get an opportunity to interact with a documentary filmmaker, I decided that I was going to focus on my story as a independent documentary filmmaker, which I never thought that I would be. If someone were to tell me when I was 15 or 16 years old that I would one day become my own boss and I would make documentary films for a living, and that I would be a storyteller, I would never believe them. It would not seem within the realm of possibility that would be my profession, my career, and something that I was very passionate about. But when I look back at my life, I've always been a storyteller. It's just that I did not know it. I didn't realize that I was a storyteller. I don't have any documentary filmmakers in my family. To my knowledge, I don't even think I have any storytellers in my family who were older than me, who I could look up to and see as, my model to become a storyteller. So I want to share with you a story about how I came to become a documentary filmmaker, if that's okay with you all. So a long time ago, when I went off to college, I had dreams and aspirations of becoming a television anchor. I wanted to be a news anchor. I thought that I wanted to be like Brian Gumbel or Bernard Shaw, who used to be the anchor on CNN many years ago, or Ed Bradley, who was a reporter for 60 Minutes. I thought I wanted to be in the news business. And so when I went to Northeastern University, the school that I'm boasting about on my shirt, I majored in speech communication, thinking that would be a pathway to becoming a TV broadcaster. But when I started taking classes in that major, it became very clear to me that most people in the major weren't really serious and didn't really know what they wanted to pursue in life. They weren't taking the education very seriously. It seemed like it seemed too amorphous for me to like really derive anything of real value or worth from that particular major. So I decided to change my major to journalism, and I concentrated. My concentration became radio and television broadcasting, which was much more on the path of where I felt that I wanted to go. And I enjoyed my major for a good deal of time. And then I did 3 internships. One was at Channel 4 in Boston, the next was at Channel 7 in Boston, and then the final one was at Channel 5 in Boston. And it was through those internships that I realized that I did not want to get into television news, because I felt like television news only told a part of our story, meaning the story of Black and brown people in the communities that I came out of. And so I felt like I needed more time and more space to tell longer stories that could contextualize the issues that we face with. At the same time, when I was a senior in college, I took a class called Blacks in the Media and the Press. And it was a class that deconstructed the images and representations of Black people in the news, on the big screen movies, in television sitcoms, in magazines, in newspapers, and all forms of media. And I was taught by a teacher by the name of Elizabeth Hadley Friedberg, who was a really intelligent, really hard-nosed instructor who really challenged us to think critically about the images and the representations that we consumed as viewers and as readers. And the class really challenged me to think deeply about some of the images that I had normalized of Black people as being criminals, oversexed, as women being sapphires and Jezebels, and all of the negative stereotypes and tropes that have come to define much of Black people in the imagination of white people. And so the class was a really great class for me because I learned so much. But the real change that took place in my young life was coming into contact with a filmmaker named Marlon Riggs, who was an independent documentary filmmaker based in San Francisco, the Bay Area in California. And my professor showed us his films. One film that she showed us was called Color Adjustment. We also watched his film, Tongues Untied. Later on, I watched a film of his called Black Is, Black Ain't. Marlon Riggs was a really talented and really brave and courageous filmmaker who took on issues of race, class, and gender. He also was very open about his sexuality. He was a gay Black man, and he was very, he owned his sexuality unapologetically. And it was the first time really that I had experienced, a Black man who was open about his sexuality but did not allow his sexuality to define him. He still saw himself as a Black person, first and foremost, who was concerned about racism in America. And so my professor showed us his films, and I was completely transformed by them. I thought that he was an incredible storyteller. He was really cutting edge in terms of the issues that he dealt with. And he also helped me to better understand some of the images that I had internalized as a young person and how problematic those images were, the constructions of, these various Black identities that in some cases were real, but in many cases were not real. And so he became sort of like my model, because I was so transformed by his work. I was so transformed by his filmmaking and his storytelling that I said, that's what I want to do in life. I want to be like Marlon Riggs. I want to have the same impact on young people that Marlon Riggs had on me. I also had a professor in the journalism department, the broadcast concentration, who was an independent documentary filmmaker. And he made films for Connecticut television, Connecticut Public Television, CPTV. And so he would always tell me these stories about his experiences making films and traveling all over the world to tell these stories. And he was kind of like a one-man band. This is before people had cell phones where they could go out and shoot their own material. He had his own camera. He would go out, he would shoot his own material. He would come back and he would edit his own material. And he would tell stories from a Black male perspective. And so I had those different forces working on me as a young person that had a really great influence on me, and sort of contributed to my strong desire and my passion for documentary filmmaking. So after I saw Marlon Riggs's work and I was impacted by my professor, I made a decision I was going to make my first documentary film. And so my first film in college was called Moving Memories, the Black Senior Video Yearbook. And it took me not 6 years, but it took me 6 months to make. And I traveled around campus for those 6 months. And I videotaped all of the Black graduating seniors about their experiences of going to college at a predominantly white university in New England. And it was my first film. And I remember the night when we had the premiere for that film at my college's library, and it was a packed house. There was not an empty seat. We served popcorn. We turned on, the screen, and we showed the film, and people laughed and they cried at something that I created. And that experience was just so powerful for me because it confirmed my instincts about the power of storytelling, and it also validated me as a budding filmmaker. And then after I made that film, I graduated from Northeastern, but I wasn't able to get a job making documentary films, so I had to take another job so that I can earn a living and pay my rent. And I got involved with this program called the Mentors in Violence Prevention Program, which was a program designed to educate boys and men about sexism and all forms of violence against girls and women. And so that sort of shaped and informed my ideas, not just about race, but also about gender. And so I had like a light bulb went off in my head that said, well, what if I combined my ideas around race with my ideas around gender and make films that deconstruct race and gender? And so as a result, I decided to make my first film after college, which is called I Am a Man, Black Masculinity in America. And it's about the trials and tribulations of being a Black man in American culture. And it's a film that's still relevant today, by virtue of what we're seeing going on in the culture. That film took me 5 years to make. And I put a lot of energy and a lot of effort into that film. And I thought that the film was going to be like my big break as a filmmaker. And I received a little bit of money from an organization that would help me to get this film on national television on PBS. And so I took the time to finish the film. And once I finished the film, I submitted it to PBS and they rejected it. A film that took me 5 years to make. It was my very first professional film. I was like completely heartbroken. I was disappointed. I was a little bit depressed. I had spent a lot of money. I used my own money. I didn't have, my bank account was depleted, and I had to take a job, like a real job, so that I can just pay my bills and get through this moment of disappointment. But the entire time that I was working in my job in public relations, a job that I did not want to take, but I had to take, I was thinking about my next film. And so one day I made the decision to quit my job and move from Boston back to New York. And by the way, I drove through New Haven, Connecticut to get there. And I came home to New York, and I decided that I was going to hook up with a filmmaker named Stanley Nelson, who made films for PBS, because I wanted to learn how to navigate that system. And so once I spent some time working with Stanley and understanding his process, I struck out again on my own, and I decided to make another film. And I wrote a proposal for a documentary called Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, which is a film about the representations of masculinity in rap music and hip hop culture. And that film took me 5 years to make. And I poured my heart and soul into that documentary. In fact, it took a long time for me to raise the money for that film. And I believe, I think I rewrote the proposal for that film 26 different times. I wrote 26 different proposals for the same film. And I got rejected by 3 different I got rejected by one funding organization 3 different times before I got the money to make that film. But eventually I got the money for the film. I made the film, and it became a real thing called Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. And after 5 years of working really hard on that film and all of the ups and downs of making an independent documentary film, the film made it to the Sundance Film Festival, and that became my break. That became the film that I'm probably the most well known for. And it was a film that aired nationally on PBS multiple times, as well as Magic Johnson's TV station, Aspire TV, and it helped me to make the next film that I worked on called Soul Food Junkies. And so I guess if there's anything that, you know, there's any takeaway to my story as a filmmaker, is that you have to really believe in yourself, in your dreams, and in your vision, and find the support that you need in order to make those dreams come true. And if you just kind of stick with it, regardless of the highs or the lows, you know, you can emerge from those experiences, having realized your dreams and making, you know, your ideas of what you want to see for yourself manifest. So that's my story.
All right. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Byron. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
It is so timely. I think that we are talking about images, and particularly images of Black men, African American men, in this moment that we find ourselves. So I'd love to hear your reflections on how the image of plants stuff we're seeing folks taking to the streets around right now, and you know, just your reflection on that. I'd love to hear.
Well, you were going out a little bit, but I think I understand the gist of your question. So just like any Black person, not Black male, but any Black person, I'm deeply moved by the incidents that sparked the outrage. Not the outrage itself. Of course, I'm moved by the galvanizing and the mobilization of Black people and other people who support the idea that we have to confront police violence. But I'm also very moved by, you know, the stories of police violence against Black women in addition to Black men. You know, I guess I feel like most Black people, especially Black people who have reached a certain age, where we've seen these abuses of power happen over and over and over again, where no one is held accountable for the misconduct. I feel fed up and I feel angry about the idea that someone could actually kneel on someone's neck. A police officer could kneel on someone's neck for almost 9 minutes and nothing happened to them, right? They don't actually serve time. And so like most people in American society, I'm very, very upset, but I stand in solidarity with everyone who's out on the streets protesting at this time.
All right. Yeah, we have yeah, and Barry, thank you for that testimony, and it was very powerful. There were a couple of people who have asked, where can they find your work?
Sorry about that. So if you go to my website, beheard.com, they should be able to find my work there. I'm also on social media at Byron Hurt, on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. I usually use Instagram and Facebook when I use Twitter. But my film, Soul Food Junkies, the one that I talked about just very briefly, and I don't know if I did mention Soul Food Junkies, but this film is available on Amazon Prime right now. It's also available on shoppbs.org, as well as Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. So those are 3 places.
Okay. Thank you. And I've seen 2 of them, so I have to go and get I Am a Man.
Well, that was my first film. So it's I cringe when I watched that film because it was so crudely made. But I think the issues are still relevant. I mean, it's all about Black masculinity in America. And, many of the issues that we're facing today that we see played out, that leads to police brutality are discussed in this film. That the idea that Black men are threatening, the idea that Black men are threats, or that need to be controlled, that we're violent. It's all in this documentary film. And so, I say that in a way that I'm disappointed, that these are issues that we still have to deal with, all of these years later, since the time that I made this film.
Right.
Thank you. So listen, don't worry about that because I've watched Pootie Tang over and over.
Oh
So
man, well if you watch Pootie Tang,
we'll be able to get through this.
You're good with this. If you watch Pootie Tang.
So Kia asked, how did you handle the waiting and closed doors? And what did you have to say to yourself to endure 5 years before your work was able to be recognized by others?
Well, believe it or not, rejection motivates me. Some people become deflated when they get rejected. Rejection inspires me to take things up a notch, and so, I have an incredible sense of will, and if somebody rejects a proposal or an idea that I have, in my opinion, that only means that I have work to do, right? I have to get back to the drawing board and I have to, figure out what I need to do to make it more, amenable. To be honest with you, with my film Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, I wrote the proposal for this film. As I told you, I got rejected 3 times. And after the first 2 proposals, I realized that, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to follow my heart and my instinct, and I'm going to write what I really feel in this proposal. I'm not going to try and appeal to the funders. I'm going to be true and I'm going to be honest to myself as an artist and as a storyteller. And so rather than trying to write a proposal that was going to be acceptable to the funders, I just kept it real with myself. And that's the proposal that got funded. The one where I kept it real in terms of my vision. Oh, and in terms of, what do I say to myself when a film takes me 5 years to get done? I realized that everything happens when it's supposed to happen, right? And if a film is not done, that means it's not finished. You understand what I'm saying? And that means that there's more work that needs to be done on that particular film before the film can be put out into the universe. Or it could also be that the universe is not ready for the film yet, right? And so for me, it's more important for the universe to be ready and open to hearing what I have to say than for me to rush to get a film out that's not ready. One of my favorite rappers is Talib Kweli. And there's one it's like an interlude or something. I think it may be right before he starts a new song, and he says, people ask me when my new album is going to be done, and I tell them when it's finished, right? My album is going to be finished when it's finished, right? And so that's the approach that I take with my filmmaking. The film is finished when it's finished. You have to have a lot of discipline. You have to be able to really focus. You have to really be able to focus on the end game, and you just can't give up. You got to hang in there.
You have a question about racism in the documentary film industry.
Okay.
Anything about your experiences with racism, and
well,
how to confront that. so these critical
think-
stories are shared?
I think that, you know, racism is everywhere, right? Structural racism is in every industry. And that includes the documentary filmmaking industry. I have to say that I've been very fortunate and I've been very blessed that every film that I have proposed to make, I've received funding to make. Now, do I get as much funding as my white counterparts, as my white male counterparts? No, I do not. So that is a struggle for Black documentary filmmakers. Now, I also want to acknowledge the fact that as a man and as a Black man, I probably get more opportunities than do Black women documentary filmmakers. And that's something that has to change. And I do the best that I can to amplify the voices of women documentary filmmakers of color who are talented, who are, you know, smart, and who know how to make really good top-notch films. So yes, there's racism in our industry, there is sexism in our industry, and there are a lot of barriers to getting access to resources, getting access to certain streaming platforms, right? That Black people don't have, that white filmmakers that white filmmakers do have. And I'll also say this: there is an issue within the documentary film world of white storytellers who get funding, a lot of funding to tell Black stories, right? And so we have a lot of documentary filmmakers of color who are now pushing back on that and saying that Black people and people of color are the best positioned to tell unique stories about Black people and about Black communities, right? And so those are some of the issues that we have to work against and that we have to address in addition to making our films.
Thank you, Byron. Thank you. I think we have one more question for you. And it comes from the up and coming hip hop artist and record label owner who lives in our house. So this is from our son.
Okay.
He clearly was intrigued by your deep look into the hip hop culture in your documentary. Any advice you can offer him?
As far as becoming a hip hop producer?
So he's an artist and a record company owner.
Find yourself a really good business partner. You know, I think if you're gonna run a business, I think that you have to partner up. You know, you have to find somebody who is able to fill in the gaps. You know, whatever, we all have strengths, but we also have blind spots. We have areas that may be weaknesses, you know, as business people. So I think it's important to make sure that you find somebody who you trust, who's interested in supporting your idea, your business, and then you know, sort of concretizing that relationship. In other words, you know, form some sort of a written partnership agreement, right? So that if anything happens, there's a binding agreement that helps you to solve problems, you know, quickly and easily. And then, you know, just really make sure that you're learning on a regular basis how to build and grow your business, you know. You know, if you're going to be running first of all, running your own business is very difficult. It's very challenging, right? You're constantly working, right? You're constantly working to maintain your business. You're constantly working to sustain your business, and you're constantly, you know, working because, you know, you are your business. So, you know, I have these checkbooks that are out right here, right? And I have, you know, other things that I have to do on a regular basis to make sure that I'm maintaining and keeping up with all of the things that are necessary to run the business, right? So you know, making sure that I have a really good bookkeeper, making sure that I have a really good accountant, making sure that I'm paying invoices on time, right? Making sure that I have the support systems set up to make sure that, you know, things are being done in a way that is professional, right? Working with, you know, people who I do business with. So, you know, I think just it's a matter of really taking seriously, you know, the idea of having something that is your own, right? It takes a lot of work to maintain. If you own your own home, it takes more work to own your own home than if you rent, right? Because you're the sole responsible person to make sure that the upkeep of your house is where it needs to be. So, I mean, those are just some, pieces
Yeah.
of advice that I would give. But if I had to do things all over again, I think that I would approach, running a business a little bit differently, including some of the things that I just mentioned.
Great.
Right.
Well,
Great.
thank you so much, Byron,
You're
for
welcome.
joining us and being part of our season closer for season 3 of Storytellers
appreciate it.
Haven. We very,
appreciate
very
it.
much appreciate you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Byron.
We
Appreciate you, man.
certainly appreciate our audience, our faithful audience that has been with us at CONCAT for most of our season. And we want to certainly thank the team at CONCAT that has hosted us and all of you all that world to be online and virtual with us. Certainly Kevin earlier thanked Bill Graustein and the support that he's provided for us to be able to do this. We do wrap for the summer. We meet up until June and then take July and August off. You never know, we might pop up if some stories just have to be told. We might be back, but otherwise we'll be back in September, looking to fill up our schedule from September to June, 2 tellers a month. So certainly connect with us. You can reach us by email at storytellersnewhaven@gmail.com. You can also hit us on Facebook at our Storytellers New Haven page. If you're interested in telling, we'd love to slot you in for our upcoming season. Kev, anything else?
No, I just want to say thank you. I'm really grateful for us to be able to have moved to this platform and to keep it going. Zoom has allowed us to continue to build community. And I think, Storytellers was right on time, given what we've been, like, so much has changed since the last time we've met. So I do agree with you that if we get enough maybe requests and a story needs to be told in July or August, I think we could probably do that. But again, I want to thank you, Karen, for sharing. It was a powerful story, as we knew it would be, and also Byron for sharing that powerful story as well. And just thank you for all the comments too, because I think a lot of the comments are coming from people that are out here doing this work and who can clearly connect to what both of our tellers were saying this evening. And it kind of confirms and validates that what we're doing is meaningful and it will inspire us to continue to move on. So with that, happy summer to everyone. Please be safe, and we'll see you when Connecticut reopens.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.